Hello, everyone. Good evening, morning, afternoon to all of you who are coming from all parts of the world. I have the honor and the privilege to introduce Anna Chesner to you, who would uh, be our guest in the Journal Club. Anna Chesner is a co-director of London Centre for Psychodrama Group and Individual Psychotherapy, which is a part of FEPTO. She's been writing, supervising, working extensively with students and clients, teaching in Austria, in Hong Kong. And we do hope if we invite her in other corners of Europe, she would also come to our places. And I must admit that I've met her only a couple of moments ago, but we all will have the pleasure and the opportunity to read her wonderful books and ideas, whom she's shared graciously with us, because she's published on one-to-one psychodrama, our topic today, but also on creative supervision. And her latest book, co-authored with Celine Boutet and Bryn Jones, is on creative action methods and in supervision and coaching. So we are looking forward and probably keeping the opportunity to invite her again in our journal club. But for today's session, I would just give you a bit of technical instructions, and that would go like this. Anna would go through certain parts of the text and certain clinical examples, and then we'll pause a little so you would have the opportunity to ask questions, reflect on the material, or we'll make some discussion, and then we'll go on, and hopefully in 3 or 4 bits, we would go through the whole material, and an hour and a half would be, it won't be enough, but nevertheless, we would do our best. So when we stop, then I'll ask you to please raise your hand either by Zoom device or just wave, and I would invite you to ask or to reflect. So now, Anna, the floor is yours.
Thank you. So thank you everybody for giving your time to this event this evening. I hope you find something of interest in it. And one of the reasons I've asked you to keep your cameras on if you're able to is I like to be in relationship with the people I'm talking to. It kind of makes me a bit nervous when I just see these boxes with a name on. I want the closest thing to eye contact that I can manage between London and Sofia or wherever you may find yourself. So, this article is called Backstage Thinking in One-to-One Psychodrama Psychotherapy. And I was inspired to write it because I teach a module on the training in London on one-to-one psychodrama. And I notice that when people first engage with this module, they kind of want one-to-one psychodrama to be the same as group psychodrama. So group psychodrama is the default in a way. But I believe that when we work one-to-one, we have to make different choices because we're working not for 2.5 hours with the support of a whole group. We're meeting maybe once a week for 50 minutes. And I think this matters. And I think in a way we're very free in these sessions to find our own style. And certainly that's what I encourage our trainees to do. But how do we find our own style? And how do we make the choices that we make when we're working with clients? And it seems to me that a lot of activity is going on backstage. So it's going on in the head, quietly, sometimes many voices trying to be heard all at once. And the actual things that are said or the things that are done in the sessions can be seen as the kind of performance of a session. That could be like the piece of theatre. There's the action of the session, but what we put into that action depends on choices we make. So I wrote this article really to find a way of expressing some of the processes that go on in the therapist, which help to guide us in the choices that we make. Is that clear so far? Great. I see people nodding. I'm feeling happier. So one of the main contrasts that I highlight towards the beginning of the paper is the contrast between being and doing. And I'm just going to read the short paragraph where I introduce this concept. A therapy session, bounded by the temporal and spatial frame of the session, that's the time and the space, provides a special opportunity for the client to be in the presence of an interested and relatively neutral other, and to attend to their own processes and reflections. This frame, recurring in a regular and predictable way, can in itself be transformative. I think I'm saying sometimes just being in therapy and turning up can be therapeutic. Those of us who tend to prioritize the action component of psychodrama psychotherapy should remind ourselves of the value of being and being with. It's the foundation of the therapeutic relationship. On the other hand, there might be a danger that if we wait too long to introduce the language of creative action, the language of doing, we conspire to create a cultural conserve that keeps the therapy sessions going round in circles, revisiting familiar narratives and complaints, but not necessarily moving towards change. Even when there's a natural pause, a natural hiatus in the need to talk, not moving into action might still be the creative choice. So I'm kind of introducing this dialectic here between doing and being. And I'm not saying one is better than the other. I'm saying we have to find a balance, and it's how we go about that decision or those decisions that's really important. So I'm going to talk through the first clinical vignette, and then what I'd like to do is to hear your reflections on the ideas that I've presented so far. So this is a guy called Bob who came with anxiety. And this is a situation where I prioritized the realm of being over the realm of doing. And I'd like to share why I did that. So Bob is a young man. He was in his mid-20s. I think he was in his first big job in the city in London. And he was suffering from anxiety and panic attacks. During the assessment period of our work together, I introduced quite a few creative techniques to unpack his life story and the chronology of his issues with anxiety and panic. So we did timelines, we concretized things to get a sense of Bob's story. Subsequently, most of the session time is dedicated to his ruminating about his daily life, and always through the perspective of anxiety, potential panic attacks, and the things he's doing to stay alive and well. So I went to the gym, but maybe I went to the gym twice and I should have gone once, or I went 4 times. This kind of talking. I went on the underground, but underground's one of those places where I might get a panic attack. That's what I mean by the ruminating. And there seems little depth to these accounts. And I get the feeling that he sees himself like a faulty machine that needs constant vigilance in order not to go wrong at any moment. That's his relationship with self. And I'm kind of going through this with him and thinking, I don't think I'm being a very good therapist at the moment. Nothing much is happening here. But I waited a while. And eventually, after maybe 2 months, there was a silence in the room. And the statement, I don't seem to have anything to talk about. And he looked a little bit apologetic about it and predictably a little bit anxious. So the statement feels like an anxious and rather embarrassed request for me to offer up a fix. I don't. I smile and I say, good. Tell me what that's like to run out of things to say. And what happens then, and we discussed this in both of our opinions, was a turning point in the therapy. We explore how alien it is for him to just be, to be with himself, to maybe notice his discomfort, and to become aware of the moment-to-moment sensations that are coming up without any attempt to change something. So obviously I could have offered a piece of psychodramatic work in that as a response to what he said. But my judgment was at that point that I would be in danger of colluding with his constant doing as an unhelpful attempt to avoid just being. I suggested we just sit quietly for a couple of minutes and then share what the experience was like. So you could say that framing the exploration of just being was an action intervention in its own right. I gave a 2-minute time limit. It was a bit like a mini meditation, something like that. Or that it was a creative experiment, a bit like a Gestalt therapist might offer. But it certainly lacked the familiar psychodramatic markers of concretization, getting on our feet, or exploring role. Nonetheless, I would say it was spontaneous, an adequate and transformative response to a new situation. And the therapeutic relationship changed, as did the way that he used the sessions, and the theme of anxiety receded as his experience of being himself deepened. And I'd actually go so far as to say that the theme of our work became, what is it to be me? And at some point we noticed it had been several months before we'd even spoken about anxiety. So it was a kind of a mutative intervention. It was an intervention that created some change. So that's my first pause for reflections, questions, provocations.
Come on, Marcos, could you please ask your question?
Yes. Thank you for your introduction. I have two small remarks. The first one, you're saying or you're writing that the therapist should be almost neutral to the patients. Wouldn't it be better to say to stay in a complementary role constellation to the client? That means neutral is sounds to me something as absent, not being in contact with, but being as a complementary part of this role play at the talking stage is a different kind of perspective, maybe. This is the first remark. And the second remark, sometimes I notice that although we are talking with patients, the patients over the course of therapy are, let's say, they are getting adapted to a conversational style, which is similar to a playing style in psychodrama. That means the talking style is rather psychodramatic. So not acting, but talking in a psychodramatic style maybe can also be classified as a kind of psychodrama action style, but not coming into actions, stand up and concretize the scenery, but within your words, within your thoughts, it seems to be psychodrama in words. So maybe the differentiation between being and doing, the in between, there is a kind of talking and conversation that's a status in between. So you're talking and you are doing some kind of psychodrama. So I would suggest that there is not only two parts, this doing and being, but a third part maybe.
Can I respond?
Of course, you're most
Yeah.
welcome.
So I really agree with the second point. And I think that to create a kind of culture of playful, curious conversation really is in the spirit of psychodrama. So that's a lovely framing of that. The first one about being in the complementary role, I don't agree with you.
Okay.
I think that I think we exercise choice, or I like to try and exercise choice about whether I go into a complementary role. I might go into a role that's almost like a double to just be with and lend my ego to the client's ego in a way. Or I might come in a quite a provocative way, quite a challenging way. I think complementarity often happens in a sort of automatic way, you know, the victim and the bully, they're complementary roles. So I try to hold myself back from the complementary role and to give the client the space where they can dare to be in different ways, knowing that that complementary role isn't going to come in.
Maybe I want to clarify with that what the wording complementary means in my sense, in my point of view. It's a kind of, let's say, oriented to the current needs of the client. So this kind of complementarity, directed or in the direction, the perspective of the current needs.
I'll buy that. When I use the word neutral, I'm thinking about the client in their life, in their real life. Everybody's got an opinion. And the therapy space can be the one space where I'm not invested. I mean, of course, part of me is, but where I try to present an opportunity for, it's okay to hate your mother, but maybe nowhere else in your life can you even get near to acknowledging that. So I think there's something to be said for your idea of complementarity, but I'm holding on to my idea of neutrality in the space.
Thanks, Anna.
Yeah, thanks.
It's a question what I want to make you, because it seems to me that the word doing and being has to do with the specific clinical, psychoanalytical and philosophical paradigm. So what I want to understand better is the paradigm under this differentiation between doing and being. Because what I have understood is that you link doing to the body action and being to the reflection. And but I don't know if this is what you say, what you mean, because the word of to being is a phenomenological paradigm, and so I want to understand better.
Yeah, wow. Now you're making me think. Of course, doing can be highly reflective, but I'm thinking, I mean, the impetus for this paper came from noticing the tendency in less experienced therapists, therapists in training in psychodrama, to assume that therapy was about doing, because there's so much emphasis on managing the complexity of all the doing that we do on the psychodramatic stage in a group psychodrama session. So this is really about balancing that with the more subtle doing that I'm calling being. So I don't think they're entirely opposite, but in practical terms they are. It's like, at this moment, with my repertoire of things I can choose to do I choose to do something, or do I choose to stay just in the experience of the relationship and inviting the experience of being? So you're probably highlighting that philosophically it's a false contrast, or that they're not opposites. But I still think it's a useful I think they're useful contrasts.
May I share with you my moment of surprise just now? Because when I was reading the text, I was quite sure that this doing and being are the moduses Donald Winnicott introduced in his writings. And I find it absolutely fascinating, the Marcus comment that there must be something in between, talking about the transitional space, because it somehow fits my vein of thinking about the whole paradigm. And I was all the time thinking in the shadow of Winnicott, you know, doing and being and in between and
Yeah.
transitional space.
Absolutely. And the doing that we do is often in a transitional space, in a third space. Yeah. So shall I move on to the next phase of the paper? I don't know whether it was a very satisfactory answer for you, Angela, but
Ilona, you wanted to say something.
It was my mind thinking loudly. That was all. I was following very, very intensively, and I don't need to. I have nothing to share. I was very much involved. That's all. Thank you.
So please, Anna, could we go on?
yeah. So I then go into into exploring a particular kind of doing, which is the therapist's doing his or her thinking. The backstage thinking, and I divide this into two kinds. I mean, loosely speaking, I say left brain, right brain. I mean, I think that's just a kind of metaphor, really, but I think that we gain valuable information by being alert both to our cognitive, deliberate left brain thinking, clinical thinking that we've trained hard to get to, but at the same time also keeping the channel alive, which is much more intuitive, sensory based. And I think we need both. So this is what I describe. And I come into, I think particularly in one-to-one work, which is more, in a way, it's a little bit more complex than in group psychodrama. In group psychodrama, certainly in the way that I do it, there's a contract. I know where this piece of work is going to go. And it's my job to help guide the protagonist, the group, towards what's underneath that investigation. But in one-to-one, often people come in with several different strands, several different things that they're always talking about. The argument with my mother, some conflict with my partner, something going on with my boss, great movie I saw last week. And it's like, what sense do I make of these multiple narratives? So the more cognitive thinking approach, the more analytical approach that we use at London Centre to think about those different narratives, we call role analysis. Well, there are different kinds of role analysis. The kind that we do is informed by Anthony Williams, Delmira Bustos, Ginny Jeffries. So that's the way that I'm describing role analysis here. So I'm going to unpack it through the vignette. It's a little bit more alive than trying to talk about it as empty theory. So this is Sarah, a woman in her late 30s who is struggling with depression. In the first few sessions of therapy, she tells the story of a job that she's recently started, in which she finds herself feeling on the outside, sensing that she's not made a good start. She's not integrating with the team. She's concerned that this will impact her future journey in this role, and that it will be a repetition of an experience she's had in a number of different jobs, where she found herself on the outside, feeling misunderstood, underappreciated, and held back from career progression. It's not an uncommon story, actually. And even with this very small amount of information, I can begin to create a tentative role analysis, which I don't necessarily share with the client, but I'm just using it to find some pathway through the stories. So I'm looking at the context, the behavior, the feelings, the beliefs, and the consequences. So to begin with, the first factor is the context, in which I ask myself, what is it that Sarah is facing? What's in her life that she's facing? What is it that the other or others are doing to which she has a role response that's brought her to therapy? And it's really useful to start by thinking about the wider context, to think about what's happening in her life rather than seeing her as a closed system. We experience our difficulties because we are relational and we have a role response to what's around us. So I frame it as a situation where she faces the task of integrating as a new person into an established group and finding a sense of belonging. So she's facing this task, and she's facing the people who embody this challenge. And then the second factor I consider is what's her behavior. And that means what's the actual doing of her response to this situation. And I subdivide this into external behaviors and internal behaviors. Externally, she shows up. She goes to work, she tries to be a good team member, but in her way of doing it, she's looking out for small signs of rejection. That person didn't say hello to me this morning. That person talked right past me to somebody else. Internally, she has a behavior as well. She generates negative and diminishing self-talk that undermines her confidence and spontaneity, and that mirrors her sense of the external response of others. In other words, she tells herself, I don't belong here. I can't do this. I'm going to fail in this job just as I've failed in the other job. I'm not going to be able to belong. And this is going on in her very loud backstage thinking, perhaps. Then the third factor are her feelings. She feels anxious. She feels trapped in a repeated loop. And that brings a further feeling of shame. I'm not good enough. And then the fourth factor we call the belief system, and it's really the implicit beliefs, the assumptive world that she has. And these can be beliefs about self. I'm useless, I'm a loser. Belief about other. They don't like me. They can see through me. They think I'm inadequate. And a belief about the world. So in her case, she believes about herself that she is doomed to be unappreciated and that she doesn't have the social skills to convey confidence or to belong. About others, she believes that they see her and judge her as different, not one of them, as inferior. And about the world, she believes that people from her cultural background, ethnicity, and class are at a disadvantage that cannot be overcome, and that attempts to challenge the status quo are futile and are likely to lead to shameful consequences. This is the thing that really traps her. And then the fifth thing is the consequences, which usually equates to the reason that the nature of the problem. So in this case, the consequence is that she feels depressed and stuck, even at this moment of having a new opportunity. So that's a kind of way of formulating, framing what seems to be coming across as her way of constructing her world, even from these first few sessions. And you could summarize it in terms of overdeveloped and underdeveloped roles, which is another way of using role theory. There's an overdeveloped role of the wronged outsider or the unappreciated team member. These are roles that she's already practiced. There's an underdeveloped role of optimistic joiner of a group or open-minded and determined team member. These are very underdeveloped. And in terms of adequate roles, the mere fact of coming to therapy for help suggests that she has the role of an aware self-reflector, an honest contemplator of her difficulties, and an honest contemplator of potential change. And in her case, you know, the fact that biographically she began from early childhood, she was in care and then adopted, and then the family moved a lot. It's not surprising that when she's a new member trying to belong in a new group, it's not surprising that some of these difficulties re-emerge. And that would be the locus of role, which, of course, in the early stages of a therapy, I'm not inclined to dive into. She's got enough on her plate with going to work every day and struggling with that. So there's something about the pacing of the work that's very important as well, about not going for the jugular straight away, if you like. All of this therapeutic reflection remains backstage for the moment, but offers a supportive framework for the therapist's presence in the room. So what I'm saying is that this way of thinking is there to support me. And if I can be fully present and confident in my being with the client and hearing their narrative, that will support the work. Is that a good point to pause? Before we go into the more, what could I be doing? What would be the creative interventions?
I believe this is a wonderful point for reflections.
Okay.
So please share your reflections. Marcus, you're welcome.
Yes, I would like to challenge this thought that role analysis is possible to do in parallel with being in contact with the client. In my perspective, role analysis would be a good part at the end of a session to think about the roles, the role development, and other things in your terms. But within this the session, a lot of narratives are popping up in the client, and the client is talking and talking and talking and jumping from one narrative to another narrative. And my thinking and my role analysis is always lagged behind. So that my energy is in the past, not in the present. So when I'm thinking, I would say I would be out of contact with the client. I'm losing the client. And the only thing that I'm in contact with is my body, my inner feelings, my thoughts. When I hear the narratives, this is one thing what is currently in the present available for me as a therapist. And then the other thing what is also available for me is that I can track micro changes of behavior in the client, in the face, in the gesture, in the posture, and I can invite the client to stop talking and to reflect on these subtle changes of visible changes for me, to reflect what that means. So with these two kinds of reflections, reflection of my thoughts, my body sensations, and also these micro changes in the client, I'm able to stay in the present. In contrast, doing role analysis means I have to think, I have to put all my resources into this very complicated, in my point of view, very complicated analysis, and I'm lacking behind because the client is talking and talking and providing new things from one sentence to the next sentence.
Yeah, I can see that that's probably true for you. For me, it offers a different opportunity. I completely value the somatic awareness and the looking for micro changes, but this doesn't require a lot of thinking for me. This requires, in a way, it's a habit of not being too seduced by the content of the narratives. feeling in a way for the skeleton, for the structure beneath them. And it's a very practiced way of listening. I mean, we use it in the here and now on the stage in psychodrama as a group process as well. So I think if it were a very heady thing, then I agree, we would be lagging behind. But I think as a supportive framework for thinking about something a little bit deeper than the content, it can be really helpful. And it can be really helpful with finding those little interventions that relate to what you were talking about before about a complementary role. Because if I can see the kind of patterns that underpin her way of being, I'll be more attuned to what it might mean for me to say or not say something at a certain point. But it's an interesting challenge.
Angela, please.
Anna, I want to ask you if you use sometimes to share with your client this kind of theoretical hypothesis and talk about it. And if you do it when you choose the time when it's appropriate to talk about this.
It's a great question. The answer is yes. I do talk about it. The more subtle question is why and when. I think with any, I mean, it's a bit of an interpretation, isn't it? So with the whole principle of any interpretation is not to to share something like that when the client is almost there already. Not to be 3 steps ahead and say, well, I'm going to tell you about you. That would be unattuned. So I think the times when I share is when we've been around the block enough times for some of the patterns to be already known. Oh, that's a bit like that, isn't it? And oh, that's that response again, isn't it? So it might not be all at once, but if it's already coming into the conversation that the client is beginning to make sense of their own cultural conserves, their own habitual ways of being, then it can be a very useful way of summarizing that, because then it opens the question, so what would you like to do differently, or what might we need to do together to get to the locus of role? You know, in other words, if somebody's talking about their difficulty at work, there's no point saying, I want you to tell me about your early adoption experiences and the changes at school, unless they're already on board with recognizing that, oh, my whole way of how I feel about myself when I have to join a new group probably has something to do with the many experiences in my life. So the answer to your question is yes, and it's about attunement, and it's going to be different in each case. But I think the principle would be when they're almost there, when they're making links. What do you think, Angela?
Yes, and I thinking about the fact that for me, it's important to have the client as an equal partner. And I think this is a kind of empowerment when he knows what is in my mind. If I have hypotheses or if I think about something, even theoretical,
Yeah.
I prefer to talk about it. And ask him what you think about this. This has sense for you? It's in this way.
Yeah, I share that preference of being transparent, but it's not always appropriate.
Yes, of
It's
course.
when a client is receptive. Some clients might find it very, or in certain moments, might find it very intrusive because it's just not where they're at. They just want to be heard and supported and be with, that. So I think it's this whole paper's about the balancing act.
I agree. Thank you.
Thank you.
Natalia Paramonova's got a question.
Yeah, thank you. I just think about the way how we can find the roles. For example, I just think if the therapist can name his role in the process, sometimes it is easier to find the role from the client. And probably you can share in your experience, there were or no sometimes the situations when you take a role in the here and now relationships, but you take the role which the client just offer you unconsciously.
Well, I think that's happening all the time in a way. I was understanding you a little bit differently at the beginning. I thought you were talking more about just being more transparent about a response. I don't take psychodramatic roles with my clients in one-to-one. I don't do that. My role is the therapist in the room, and that can be a different kind of therapist. Sometimes a facilitative therapist, sometimes a playful or a provocateur, something like that. My role repertoire, many different kinds of therapists, but not a psych. I wouldn't become the team member who looks like that at the client and, who are you? I mean, I think if you had enough trust with a certain client, one could do that. I don't tend to do it. I do go through some different interventions that I could do with her in the next bit of the paper, though.
I just thought about my own experience once when my client just, we started the session. It was the long way. It was the second year of the therapy and we established the relationships. But she just shared some really bad experience in the last week. And suddenly she just lied down on the cushion, back to me and keep silent. And I just try to share my experience, what I'm feeling about this situation, what I can offer her. And then suddenly I just keep silence as well. And for the end of the session, it was like this. And just 1 minute before the end, she just woke up, say goodbye, and go out. And in this situation, I think I had a role. It was not myself. I just accepted the role she offered me.
Yeah.
And I think it was the role of the ward who should accept her anger and her protests.
Yeah.
Probably.
Yeah.
It is absolutely marvelous how we are moving softly and swiftly to the next part of our discussion. But Anna, would you allow and accept Angela Sordano's question before we go on?
Yes.
Yeah. So Angela, please. You have to unmute yourself. You have to unmute yourself. We don't hear. Yeah, great.
And I thank you because you are opening in the group this evening many questions on which I have. I'm making some reflection. So I am active because you are moving things on which I'm reflecting by myself. I use not I call the psychodrama with one patient, not one-to-one, but a dyadic. Because I think that a one-to-one is a dyad, and there is a field that is a common field that opens to a third dimension, a symbolic. So this is the first one. But what I think there is something in the way you are presenting the cases that underlies mainly the therapist comprehension of the patient, and we cannot see what the patient is discovering by himself or herself along the interaction with Jung. So, in my opinion, the main difference between a psychodramatist that plays and a role situation is that in the psychodrama, acting psychodrama, there is the attention to the present and what is enacting the relationship between the therapist and the patient, and what is enacting this dyadic situation can have a relationship to something I have understood, but also with something new. So I think this happens also both if you act playing psychodrama. I play psychodrama with adolescent in a dyadic setting using chairs and things like this, and making a doubling on the back of the patient is a technique, but everyone can have their own. But I think the question you are opening is, who is the protagonist of the interpretation? Is the therapist? Is the patient? Who is the protagonist? So, just
well, it's the client, but the paper is about the internal process of the therapist. That's what I've attended to in this paper. And it's not a case, these are just small moments from practice to unpack some of that, some of the therapist's choices. And yes, it doesn't go into a long narrative, but they are all based on real clients, a little bit changed for the purpose of the text, of course. Yeah, but thank you. I'm glad that I'm glad that this is provoking so much active thinking. So, shall I move on then?
Yes, please. I believe you should.
So all of that, admittedly, is quite cognitive. That's the left brain thinking stuff. But it's happening at the same time as there are two people in the room. And we are in relationship and there's plenty going on. So the next stage of what I write is about the somatic being with, as a kind of backstage thinking, which is kind of what Marcus was saying before as well, I think. So what about the less conscious right brain backstage thinking that goes on? As two embodied human beings in the room, there is a plethora of communication that passes between us, body to body. For example, Sarah's physical presentation conveys something of her depressed affect in terms of her posture, which is subtly collapsed, the downward direction of her eye gaze, conveying something of her tendency towards shame. The quality of her breath and its impact on her voice tone, all of this has an impact on me, which I may not articulate clearly to myself in words, but which I sense with my body, and which may require more time to travel into conscious knowing. In the backstage arena of my own mind, I pay attention to both kinds of thinking. And when I say mind, I also mean my body mind. I don't mean my head mind. So part of my attention is always directed towards my own process, my sensing, my countertransference. So the verbal language of analytical thinking and the somatic language of the relational field dance together and contribute to the experience of attentive therapeutic presence. The combination of active backstage thinking and here and now mindful presence support the moment-to-moment attunement that is paramount in the therapy process. So that kind of balances out what, that more cognitive 5 elements of the role analysis. And it really informs the thinking about, well, what are the options for going into action? And I do list a number of these options. But I briefly mentioned this American guy called Bradford Keeney, who has written such an inspirational book called The Creative Therapist. And his way of he also uses a theatrical metaphor to frame his way of working. He's a systemic therapist. And for him, Act 1 is the complaint. Act 1 is the kind of cultural conserve, the I am stuck with how awful it all is kind of presentation. And as a creative therapist, he has the most crazy, brilliant ideas. I think he's a kind of psychodramatic cousin to Moreno, because he has these crazy ideas about things that he can do to just change the frame, to just reframe what's going on. And this is what he calls like an opening of the door into Act 2. And I just mention it in this paper because I find it inspirational and because it reminds me that the timing, I mean, there's a paper to be written, I think, about timing. It's the timing of when we say, show me, or when we say, are you open to explore this in action? And he's a genius at the timing. I do recommend his book. So I talk about various options, and I've got an example of a communicube. Well, this is a communi-well, and I don't know how many of you know this. This is it's a kind of stage, mini stage that's at 5 different levels. It's one of the things I mention in the options for action. So the first option is to work with small objects, small world, projective concretization. Always a nice, safe starting point, I think. Although I have come across clients who've not been able to project. I mean, very, very unusual, but anyway. So Sarah might configure the role relationships through these small objects. This could also be a starting point to represent previous teams or groups of people that she's tried to be part of, and to look at the patterns that have repeated over time. And you're sort of got the benefit of aesthetic distance. You can look at it and not be in that suffering place, but reflect on it as a client with the therapist. Then the next option would be to look at the relationship, the overlap between the current dynamics at work and earlier family or school experiences. I mean, that's obviously deeper, much deeper work. And it's a little bit like doing a psychodramatic vignette where you've got a presenting scene, but there's the kind of ghost of the past that's visible on the stage. And it would demonstrate how learning to belong in the present, how the challenge of learning to belong in the present has evoked the old role response from the past many different times when she's had to learn to belong. And at this point I say, and we might also work with role. So might use an empty chair. She might encounter her new boss on the empty chair. She might do a role reversal, or with different teammates and get multiple perspectives on the team dynamic. And by changing the perspectives, it's just possible that this can kind of loosen the fixed belief that they really do all think this about me. It's a wonderful technique. I think you all know that. Or we could do a more internal role work. Rather than putting the boss or the teammates on the chair, she could look at internal roles. She might go into role as the part of herself that believes she will never belong and shouldn't even expect to, you know, why don't you give up now? Or she might go into the internal role that wants to challenge that outdated belief, which would probably be the part that's come to therapy, actually. And then there's the deepening the work. We might unpack the early experiences that I've mentioned that have led to her viewing herself and the world in this way. Maybe a concretized timeline depicting the many moments during her life that have contributed to her way of being in the world could be a good starting point for this archaeological dig. And we could even go into some transgenerational work. There's clearly some issues about culture, outsider, not belonging, class, and those would come not just from her family of origin, but the wider dimensions of the past. So lots and lots of different possibilities. And I think the point that I'm making is it's good to have a balance of an instinctive, intuitive approach. Why don't we try such and such? Or would you be interested to try such and such? With a more cognitive way of getting below the content of the narratives into something that becomes a bit more structural about the client. So that forms the last part of the bit on Sarah. So maybe there are some questions or comments.
Anyone to comment, or shall we continue? Sarah, would you please? unmute and
Hi. Hi, Anna.
Hi there.
I just wondered if you ever had a sense of the changing age of the client, in how you might respond with your action. So you've got these different options. I just wondered if you ever felt them being a different age or in a different sort of developmental place that might precipitate something. Yeah.
You mean exploring, for example, a small world sculpt as a 16-year-old, although the client themselves are 50?
Yes, but I suppose not necessarily. Do you pick up on something around that they may be in that place of a different age, rather than maybe imposing something?
Yeah, it sounds
Yeah.
like you do as well. Could you want to
Yes, definitely. Well, no, definitely. That's why I'm asking you, because you've got all these options.
Yeah.
And obviously there's sort of different ways of different, in a way, kind of different ways of moving the body around and kind of positioning yourself. And I just wondered, how you respond. Yeah.
You're putting me in touch with I'm just remembering a recent piece of work. It was a woman I was doing therapy with, and she actually came with a bereavement. She'd lost her life partner. And but of course there was a back history of her own life. And I mean, it's a simple device, but just inviting her to see herself as a child on an empty chair close to her and reach out to her. And it was a short but very emotional intervention, which I think came from exactly that sense of the child was present in the room and there needed to be a relationship between this grieving adult and a very unheld child. So does that fit in with the kind of thing you're asking about? Yeah. Yeah.
I suppose it was in my mind a little bit when you were talking about the silence with the man, and just suddenly he felt very young, just the way that you were describing it.
I think that's right. I mean, to somebody my age, they were very young anyway. But I think you're right. The just how to be a person dilemma, which, and of course we face that at every age in our life. It's fascinating in a way. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Well,
Dad got a question. Yes, Dad has got a question. Please ask.
Hello, Anna. Yeah, I am Chinese, but my English isn't very good. But I want to try my best to ask a question. Yeah. Between one-to-one psychodrama to group psychodrama, do you think what's the best difference between them?
The best difference?
Big.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a great question. I actually write about this in my book on one-to-one psychodrama. I begin with this very question. Group psychodrama is extraordinary in so many ways because, where do you begin? Because you can time travel in the company of others, and you can do the group brings so much, so much. A lot of my one-to-one clients I encourage to come to some weekend psychodrama experientials that I do, and it deepens the work. But the reality is that not everybody is ready to put themselves in a group, but they might be ready to begin to face their process in the more private, conventional therapy setting. But I would say that, I mean, I love group psychodrama, and because I think it is so creative at so many levels and so complex and such an extraordinary event. I mean, it's good theatre. It's alive, you know. But I like to think that even when I'm sitting quietly with a one-to-one client or somebody in the dyad, trying to change my language now, I can still be a psychodramatist. It's the way of thinking, the way of conceiving the world as made up of group and relationship and roles and role relationships. This is transferable to group and individual. But the actual experience of the process, it's very different over time. You know, one-to-one therapy happens over a long period of time, can happen over a long period of time, but in small chunks. Each chunk has to be enough and not too much. Whereas in a group situation, you can immerse into a kind of much deeper sort of trance-like depth. I don't know if that's answered your question.
Oh, thank you very much. And maybe in Chinese, psychodramas student, we think maybe one-to-one psychodrama were like empty chair. Yeah.
Well, empty chair is one device. And this paper is also saying that even thinking like a psychodramatist changes your way of being. You're not just a talking therapist who has an empty chair. You're still thinking like someone who embodies Moranian philosophy, hopefully.
Okay, fine. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you for being here.
The question of quarter to three in China. Quarter to three in China, yes, Dada? Your time in China.
Time. But now I am in Thailand. In China, morning to 3 about 3 a.m.
And in Thailand?
Yes, in China about 3 a.m. and in Thailand is about 2 a.m. in morning.
Oh, well, it's a good thing you're young and healthy, Dada. This is just a dream.
Yeah, that's
yes.
Interesting dream you're having tonight. Shall I go on to the last two vignettes, which are about looking at the transference and to some extent the countertransference?
Yes, please.
Are we okay for time?
Yes, we do have. And if it's not a problem, probably we could extend another 5 or 10 minutes. Is it a problem?
I think let's try to stick to the time.
Okay.
Model the frame.
Okay.
But yeah, I mean, I'm happy to go on. Okay, so these the first of these is I've called the angry therapist. Now, this was how the client experienced me, and this is how I found out about it. I have a little consulting room in my own flat here, just on the other side of the kitchen over there. I've got a consulting room. As you walk into the consulting room, the first thing you see are lots and lots of different puppets hanging on the wall. And then as you come round into the room, there are various pictures, there are various masks, and some shelves that are full of small objects, cloths, cushions, props for the work. Amazingly, sometimes people come into the room and they don't seem to notice any of it. Brian is a new client coming up to his first break in therapy as the Christmas holidays approach. He had originally started therapy in order to explore his ambivalence in his relationship with his partner. Today, on entering the consulting room, he notices some masks on the wall and remarks, "I've never seen that before. Is it new?" As we sit down, I ask him what he sees in the mask, which is not new. It's been there longer than he's been there. And he replies, "It's angry, maybe scornful." So at this moment in my backstage thinking, I wonder who he's angry with. Or maybe someone's been angry with him during the week. It's unusual for him to notice the props in the room, so I'm also considering suggesting we explore creatively using the mask as a starting point to unpack the layers of meaning and associations that might be behind it. It's always interesting when clients notice things in the room as if for the first time. However, I'm also aware of it's the last session before our break. So I ask him first of all, "How have you been since we last met?" And the reply comes, "I felt terrible all week. As soon as I left here last week, I was thinking that you must be angry with me for what I said about therapy just as I was leaving. I was really dismissive, saying I wasn't sure it was helping. And then I thought that was a stupid thing to say, and you must be really angry. And that thought has been with me all week." Well, I wasn't expecting that because I'd hardly particularly paid any attention really to that comment. So, backstage thinking. At this point, I recognize that he is presenting the therapeutic relationship as what needs to be worked with, that the mask represents me, or at least his mental image of me as it has accompanied him during the week. There is the real question of whether we are a good fit therapeutically. He'd said, "I'm not sure whether therapy is really working, and I want to take that seriously. It's a new piece of work. Of course, he has a right to choose to end the therapy relationship, find a different therapist, or give up on therapy altogether." I also recognize that his ambivalence about the therapy beautifully mirrors the ambivalence in his intimate relationship that originally brought him to seek help. There's also the timing of the statement he's made. I know that breaks, especially in the early stages of therapy, can be challenging. Was his statement the previous week a way of projecting some of his feelings of uncertainty into me? It was unsettling, and I wondered to myself if the feeling I had was similar to his partner's response to his ambivalence in their relationship. Was I about to be dumped? So he's always talking about maybe I shouldn't be with her, maybe I should dump her. Did his partner also feel how precarious the continuity of their relationship was? Was it a test to see if I would let him go too easily or fight to keep the therapeutic relationship and potentially contribute to his feeling trapped? So all this is going on within about a microsecond. And I'm thinking, well, how much of this to explore today before the break? and how. I mean, I was actually really attracted to doing the mask thing, but I didn't think it was a good idea because masks can go into very deep work. All of these reflections are going on internally, and it is not a linear process. What I actually choose to do is firstly to make a link back to the mask. So I kind of formulate it. I acknowledge it represents me or his idea of me during the week. We explore his mentalization of my process in response to his statement on leaving the previous week. I choose to do this verbally rather than in action, with the internal rationale of not wanting to fan the flames of his fantasy or create too emotional a response in our last session before the break. And I also decide to take seriously the question as to whether he wishes to work towards an ending, to respect any doubts he may wish to voice, and to be as neutral as possible as to the outcome of our conversation in order to underline his agency in the decision. So I prioritize the frame and the questions of in therapy or out over the more intricate questions of the transference and the link to his presenting issue in therapy. Because I was always taught that the frame's the thing that has to be dealt with first. Such questions can be explored in depth at a later point if he's in. And if he's deciding to end, then the priority must be on co-creating a good enough ending. In the event, the conversation led to a deepening of trust and a commitment to continue the therapy after the Christmas break. This may not have been the most exciting use of psychodramatic action methods, but it was thoughtful and containing at a time when that was the most important factor. I pause for breath. What would you have done? Or perhaps there are questions rather than comments.
I was just thinking how different your question, what would we have done, sounds when you are in front of a screen, and how different it is when you are in a consulting room. So what I say now might be absolutely the opposite or quite different to what I've decided to do if I'm in a situation, in the consequence of events and this embodied encounter of those two interpersonal subjective modes of existing.
I think, Anna, in a way, you are describing what is happening all the time during session. While talking, all these suggestions come up and you put them away or you stay with them. And it seems like a sort of waiting process for something to come up, which you feel like it's the right thing to work on that or to concretize that.
Yeah, yeah. I like moments that surprise me, you know, because it's like, why now? Or somebody walks through that door and they see a particular puppet and they say, was that there last week? Those things are surprising, and that makes me curious and heightens my awareness. Because I think that's important as well for the therapist, because I can get into a kind of not expected to be surprised state. But anyway, it seems there are no questions or comments.
There is Marco. Marco is raising his hand.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you, Anna. Thank you, Anna, for your gift, very precious gift for us. Psychodrama.World is a platform who hosts articles, so I appreciated very much your article and your schema, your schema to tell clinical aspects, clinical works. So it's an example for me and for us in what way we can write clinical articles. So thank you very much for your gift. Thank you.
Thank you, Marco, and I'm very much looking forward to coming to Torino next year.
Yes, I wait to you next year in the annual meeting in Torino. Yes.
So shall I go to the angry client then? From me being the one who's accused of being angry through the mask, we finally get to the moment where a client tells me to fuck off.
That would be a very nice ending.
All together now.
Yeah.
So Maria has been in therapy for over a year. She suffers from various somatic complaints that loosely link to a history of childhood trauma. A lot of suffering, a lot of physical pain. She comes from a middle-class family. I would say actually a little higher than that. But where emotional neglect has left its mark. She presents as pleasing, polite, grateful for the space to explore a more authentic sense and expression of self. It's lovely, isn't it, when a client keeps on saying, you know, it's just, I really appreciate you and having this space. Well, it doesn't last. On this occasion, she starts by sharing that she had a powerful dream that was still on her mind, and that she begins by describing. So my initial intervention, and it's an action intervention really, is to ask her to tell the story of the dream in the present tense, as if witnessing or experiencing it right now. This is a simple action intervention which brings the experience of the dream into the here and now and activates the as if of the dream in the therapy space. So she's standing upstairs in a very large, stately home, sort of very large, these lovely, you know, the kind of English stately homes that you see in the lovely series on the television, that sort of thing. And she's looking out of the window down onto the garden, beautiful gardens. There's a driveway, the grounds of the property. There's a moat. All the best old English houses were surrounded by water as part of their defence, and a gated bridge over the moat. And she watches horrified as the defences of the property are attacked by a group of zombie-like workers who are doing the bidding of a foreman who is himself impersonal and only there to fulfill the orders of a higher authority. So that's the situation. She sweeps downstairs and attempts to stop these zombies destroying her garden and the defences at the drawbridge at the gate, to protect her property. She struggles to get the foreman to hear her and wakes up before there's a resolution. So my sense is that it would be useful to explore the dream from different perspectives. So I offer a second intervention and I ask her to draw the significant features of the dream from her point of view, so that I got a sense of the kind of the layout, and it's a bit like scene setting, and to get the spatial relationships. And at the same time, it's got a little bit of aesthetic distance as she's able to look at it. And then I introduce the idea, those of you who've done psychodramatic dream work, you know this idea, that all elements of a dream can be thought of as expressing parts of self or unlived potential roles. And with this in mind, I ask her to reverse roles with various roles in the dream and to retell the dream from that perspective, from the eye of that perspective. So she begins by recounting the experience from the role of the large house, and then the bridge, and then the moat, the foreman, and then we get to these zombie-like workers. And at this point, something happens in the room between us. She struggles to speak at all. And then finally she says, I can't do that I can't speak from the role of the attacking workers. And I say, well, it might be useful to try anyway, since it might throw some light onto aspects of your way of being that are self-attacking, particularly somatically. We'd done all this work on all the symptoms that she had, and I said, you know, maybe there's something in these zombie workers. Well, there's a big impact from my comment, and all she can say is, I've got a really strong reaction to you right now. So we pause the focus on the dream, and I ask her to say more about what's happening between us, what's going on here. It seems that I'm pushing her too hard, that's my sense, or too far, and that identifying through role reversal with the attacking figures in the dream is just not acceptable to her. It's too far. So I say, well, stay with how you're feeling, and just express yourself directly to me. And she tells me with real emotion to back off, and then to fuck off. And I'm quite enjoying it because this is definitely a new role. And it occurs to me that the dynamic of the dream had come into the room. In a way, she must have experienced me like the attacking zombies, trying to get at her defenses by this clever stuff with role reversal, you know. But in the dream, she couldn't really impact the zombies. But in the therapy room, she found her voice, and she was able to express her anger with me, and in a way that I have to say was really revolutionary. This is somebody who had had a slight car accident, which is somebody gone into the back of the car, and her way of dealing with the encounter with the person who'd really gone into the back of the car was supremely polite. So, you know, this really was an underdeveloped or undeveloped role. By pushing back and allowing the expression of her anger, she has in effect completed the dream. In my backstage thinking, I recognize this as a key moment in our relational process. and that it is the first time that she's expressed raw emotion towards me. It also marks the development of an underdeveloped or repressed role in Maria, the assertive defender of her limits. We spend some time reflecting together on how energizing it felt to push back so strongly and to see that I had survived the attack, and indeed that our relationship had survived. I think that was part of what was revolutionary, that there was no punishment for this. And for me, it was also a reminder that what I might judge as a mistake, being a too pushy therapist, go on, now role reverse with them, can be an opportunity for growth if the dynamic is explored authentically and in a moment-to-moment way, with a readiness to hold in mind both the story that's emerging in the room and the story that's been brought to the room. That's the dream story, but also the client's whole history. There we are.
I believe a moment of silence is a very appropriate ending of this most valuable and enjoyable journal club discussion. Thank you so much, Anna.
Thank you
for being our guest. And I'm looking forward to meeting you in person in Torino.
Thank you.